During this pandemic, there's a lot of fear-based energy around. We're exposed to a lot of media. People are feeling many times trapped in their homes or maybe trapped in relationships. And people are fearful for their health and their jobs and their finances. There's so many things causing a very extreme level of fear. Now, if you are someone who has PTSD or lives in a household with PTSD, that can be a real recipe for a significant amount of distress, and can even serve as a recipe for domestic violence to erupt. And the reason I say that is because PTSD is sneaky. It is equal opportunity destruction. It doesn't care who you are, how old you are, what you do for a living, what types of jobs you've had, where you live. It just doesn't care. If you've been exposed to trauma and have developed PTSD, it's there with you, and it's there with you for life. There's no cure for this. So this is something we need to develop an awareness of. So it can start, as something as innocuous of just being a little irritable. Or maybe you find you're wanting to spend less time around your family. Or maybe it's just that flutter of unrest in your belly that you feel, or maybe a little tension in the neck. But you can see how any one of those things could be anybody right now experiencing that or feeling that. So what makes a PTSD? It's a great question. But it is unwise for someone with PTSD to ignore when you start to feel those little instances, those little nudges, those little pokes, when you start to see little shifts in your behavior, little changes in how you're relating to the people close to you. It's important to pay attention. And if you don't pay attention, what ends up happening is one little thing adds to another little thing, to another little thing, and then you have this snowball, and it does pop right in your face eventually, because it can only withstand so much pressure. So how do you navigate this? How would I navigate this as somebody who lives with PTSD? See, not only do I have PTSD, but I live in a household with a husband who has PTSD. We are a Marine Corps household. And that's challenging. You have someone who has PTSD from a history of car accidents, and you have someone who has a history of PTSD from military service. That's a lot. And I know that there are many of you watching who are in a very similar position with your spouse or other loved ones who are in your household. So how do you navigate all of this? What do you do when things get triggered? I heard something this week that there's been a rise in domestic violence cases in veteran households. That's really upsetting to hear, but I can totally see how it can happen. You have to know what your baseline is. You have to know what equilibrium is for you. When is it that you do feel okay? And okay can have a lot of different levels, right? Genuine happiness is challenging to reach with PTSD. But what is baseline okay? What does feeling not triggered feel like? And it can be challenging to figure that out, especially if you find that you're having so many symptoms from day to day, like I had. It was hard for me to figure out what normal was. But once you do that, it's important to notice those slightly innocuous, kind of commonplace things that start to creep up on you. That little flutter of unrest in my belly, that's an early warning sign. And the service dog that I have picks up on it immediately. She does not let me get beyond the flutter. If I get beyond the flutter, she's right on my shoulders. So I have to pay attention because she makes me pay attention at the subtlest of levels. And she's prevented a lot of escalation for me. But in the past, that little flutter, that was a warning sign. I didn't notice it. I just wanted it to go away. That little irritation where somebody said something to me and I just, I didn't want to deal with it. And I backed away. That feeling of, I can't trust this person. Where did that come from? It just creeps in. So you have to watch the creep, I guess you could say. You have to watch for those little things that kind of creep in almost unnoticed. Like the thief in the night, just kind of scooting right in there. It's sneaky and it gets into your psyche. And if you don't notice it, it invites its friends. It's kind of like in meditation, I teach that like when you have one negative thought, here comes a whole army of them. So be prepared, they're coming, right? The same thing with PTSD. With my triggers in particular, and I know with the triggers of the other person in my household, it's one little thing leads to something bigger. You have to recognize it early. And you have to have self-awareness. This is not the kind of thing where you can just expect it to go away. PTSD doesn't work that way. It just doesn't back down by itself. It just won't. It pops in your face, causes its destruction around you, and then you're left with wondering what the heck just happened. So it's very important to be self-aware. It's also important to have a myriad of tools in place for yourself, because just trying to stuff it away doesn't work. I tried. I can tell you, been there, done that. I tried. It doesn't work. It just comes back bigger and harder and faster the next time. So it would be very wise if you live in a household with PTSD right now to make a list of some things that you can do for yourself that can keep you focused, things that don't act as extra triggers, like gluing yourself to the news. Find some simple, basic things that maybe you enjoy, or maybe they just act as a good focus. For me, at the worst part of my PTSD, I couldn't even figure out what I enjoyed. But at least there were some things that would just keep my mind occupied in a way that wasn't unhealthy, but it was a way that would just keep me from ruminating on and making this bigger and worse than it was. Because the ruminating on it is huge. You start to get one of those little devil thoughts in there, and then you start to believe it. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, it's convinced you of your entire world. And it's just, you have to be careful what you believe when those little thoughts get in there, because they're not telling you the truth. So just pay attention. I think it's disturbing to hear that there's a rise in domestic violence. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not saying PTSD always leads to that, because that would be very untrue. But if things aren't under control, if you're not being self-aware, if you're not doing things to help yourself, I can see where things can get out of control. And I speak from so many veteran families that I have met, and friends that I have, and different experiences. I can see where a situation like this could really trigger that fear and survival mode, and that creates fight or flight, and that can manifest itself in a myriad of different ways. So I encourage you and I urge you to, as a spouse, pay attention to yourself and notice how you're relating to your husband or wife. And if you are a veteran, you have to develop that level of self-awareness where you notice the little pokes at the most subtle of levels and keep track of them, because there's patterns to them, and many times they're recurring. And if you can pick up on the recurrence of them, it can really inform you as to what's coming next. And I think that has been a very important part of the process for me with my PTSD, is recognizing I have felt like this before, this poke, whatever this is, and it didn't lead to a place that was good for me. So what can I do to either explore it, quell it, or take one of those tools out of my tool belt and get to work for myself? So I hope that you are all doing well. I hope that this was a useful conversation for you. And, you know, if you are new to meditation, no harm in trying. It's good for the brain. It's good for the emotions. And it can truly help you to tap into the part of the nervous system that allows you to take a step back and get a lay of the land around you and see what's really happening, and then make some educated choices as to how you're going to move forward. Okay, take care.